Entry 1, I finally got my hands on a working pen and this small notepad, so I might as well document my situation. That's what you do when you're stuck in a strange place, right? Leave behind notes or a journal for the next unfortunate soul to stumble upon, assuming you don't make it out yourself. I've always joked that if I had to die, robosti in the mivacrypicista scenario, well, wish granted. Not that I think I'm going to die here. At least I don't think so. Then again, who knows? This place is definitely eerie, and something about it feels wrong. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start from the beginning. People online know me as Review Cultist. I run a podcast where I delve into net horror stories, analyze them, and discuss their oddities with my friends. Collecting strange artifacts and locations ties it to these legends is kind of my thing. I even took a trip to West Virginia just to drive past the supposed site of Ica Falls. So, you can imagine my excitement when, during route hiking in my local woods, I stumbled upon an old digital recorder wrapped in a plastic bag. Even with the bag's protection, the device was in roof shape. I brought in, cleaned it up, and popped in fresh batteries. Surprisingly, it powered on. At first, it didn't seem to have any saved recordings, so I did the usual test into mic and played it back. That's when things got weird. The playback contained my voice. Sure, but I was saying things I had memory of ever speaking. At first, I assumed I was just misremembering, but the more I listened, the stranger it got, and device played discussions straight out of my podcasts. Al dente rigor mortis, but with eerie distortions. At one point, a creepypasta title was mentioned, and it wasn't one we had ever covered. Stranger still, every time I rewound and played back sections, new dialogue appeared, as if the recording was changing in real time. Excitement amiss swelled inside me. My first instinct was to grab my phone and message one of my co-hosts, maybe even post a Twitter update about my bizarre find. That's when I didn't find my phone. I started searching, still clutching the recorder. My fingers must have pressed something because, out of nowhere, the device's speakers blared to life at full volume. High-pitched, warped version of our podcast's intro theme screamed through the woods. And one clinic scared the hell out of me. I dropped the recorder, its weight landing heavily on the forest floor. I barely had time to process what I was hearing before everything around me shifted. In the blink of an eye, my cozy home vanished, replaced by a dense, shadowy forest. An abrupt transition sent me stumbling backward, and I crashed to the ground. Pain shot through me, but worse than that was the sickening crunch beneath me. The recorder. I scrambled to my feet and to assess the damage. Sure enough, the device was shattered, its pieces strewn across the forest floor. But as I stared at the wreckage, I noticed something chilling. The recorders scattered all around me were dozens of them, buried under leaves and tangled in roots. Some looked ancient, their surfaces rusted and cracked. Others seemed new but were still battered by time and exposure. I picked up a few, but every single one was too damaged to function. Forest of their own sounds, birdsong, rustling leaves, distant creaks of trees swaying in the wind. But this wasn't that. This was something off. I focused, straining my ears, elation like a punch to the gut. The noises weren't natural, they were voices. Dozens, no, hundreds, of murmuring, whispering voices. Distorted and muffled, but unmistakably human. The sound wasn't coming from a specific direction. It was everywhere. And as I moved closer to one of the trees, and realized something even worse is were getting louder, I could make out a distinct set of voices, though their words remained unintelligible. What unsettled me most was their source. They were coming from inside the trees. The voices were inside the trees. This had to be a dream. I'd had my fair share of dreams before, even a few unsettling nightmares involving strange, eerie forests. Maybe this was just another one. I tried retrieve for waking up, pinching myself until my skin throbbed, even slapping my cheek hard enough to leave a bruise. Nothing worked, and I was in a coma, or had been somehow transported into this bizarre, surreal woodland. Common wisdom says that if you're lost in the woods, the best thing to do is put and wait for rescue. But did that advice still apply when the woods talked? Besides, my personal philosophy about fourways been simple. They'd be scary, yo. No way was I sticking around in the open when night fell. Determined to find shelter, I started walking before I stumbled upon a man-made trail. The path wound unpredictably, twisting and turning without any clear destination. With no better option, I picked direction, set off. The voices never stopped. That strange, ever-present murmur of conversation surrounded me, growing louder or softer as I walked. Worse still, I started hearing footsteps, always behind me, always just out of sight. Every time I turned around, the path was empty. Each time it happened, pace quickened. I must have walked for hours. There was no sign of a trailhead, no other travelers. Just me, the phantom voices, and those unseen footsteps. The terrain shifted constantly, was rising and falling, the path snaking between towering trees. Pines, oaks, and maples packed densely together. Under normal circumstances, the view might have been beautiful, but with the eerie atmosphere and the oppressive weight of the unknown, all I felt was unease. Then I noticed something strange. The sun revealed set. The forest remained locked in perpetual twilight, a dusky glow lingering endlessly over everything. Eventually, the murmuring voices ahead of me grew distinct. At first, I could pick out only scattered words, but as I crept forward and realized I was hearing full conversations, people talking a movie as if they were reviewing it. Other voices discussed different topics, overlapping in a soft, chaotic city at my steps, creeping carefully toward the source. My heart pounded as I reached the bend in the path. I expected to see people. I saw logs, not people, fallen trees and stacked in piles. Yet impossibly, the voices were coming from them, echoing from the open ends of the logs as though the wood itself was speaking. The clearing was scattered with saws, rusted tools, and an old logging crane. Opposite the clearing stood a small, cabin-like structure. There were no people in sight, but the ground was marked with boot prints, signs that someone had been here recently. I crossed the clearing quickly, unnerved by the spectral conversations spilling from the felled trees. My eyes darted around, searching for any sign of movement, but the landscape remained eerily still. Near the rusted logging machine, I spotted an old brand name painted onto the side. Gilded Pods and Casters Company. What the hell kind of place was this? I had just reached the cabin's porch when the sound hit me. A chainsaw roared to life somewhere behind me. My breath hitched. I spun around, scanning the treeline, but saw nothing, just trees and shadows stretching endlessly into the twilight. Panic surged through me. I needed to get inside. I reached for the cabin door. Praying it wasn't locked, I stepped inside and quickly shut it behind me. The interior was a single, empty office. Dusty, rustic, abandoned. A few chairs, an old couch, and a wooden tin candlestick scattered across its surface. Papers and disassembled pieces of a radio lay strewn about. Hoping for something useful, I rifled through the desk drawers. That's when I found it, a small notepad and a pen. I'm writing this now, using the last of the fresh candles out to keep the cabin dimly lit. The door is barricaded with chairs, and I'll do much if whoever, or whatever, is out there decides to force its way in. And if you think I'm about to lie down and drift off to sleep after hearing that chainsaw, twice now, each time a little closer, you'd be dead wrong. Sleep is have to take me against my will. But just in case I don't make it through the night, I figured I should at least leave a record. Entry 2 king at this note penned at the bottom of my bag. Now's as good a time as any to play catch up. An hours after last entry had been an eventful, to invent in hindsight. The cabin offered a strange, uneasy peace, like the eerie quiet before a storm. While searching for the office, I found an oat satchel and a thermos filled with what looked and smelled like tomato soup and SpaghettiOs. Despite everything, hunger won out. It tasted fresh, almost too fresh, but I wasn't about to question it. That's the last thing I remember before falling asleep on the couch. And Aswin woke up, to the sound of a chainsaw tearing through the door. The figure wielding it was tall and unnervingly thin. He wore a grimy wife beal, sengalils, gripping the saw with thick leather gloves. But it was the burlap sack over his head that made my blood run cold. A single crude was painted across the front, and his exposed skin glowed faintly with an eerie green light. As he burst through the splintered remains of the door, I heard something mechanical working, coming from under the sack. I scrambled backward, barely managing to shove the desk between us. And Walters might as have had some grand escape player. Let me be clear. I was in full-blown flight mode, desperately trying to stay as far from that roaring chainsaw as possible. With sheer dumb luck, I managed to kick the desk hard into his shins. He staggered back just enough for me to vault past him and dive for the exit, only to find that I wasn't a leather one. Same outfit, same glowing skin. This one wielded an axe, and the sack over his head bore a large, bold B painted across the front. He was moving fast, stepping silently out of the woods to my left. So I ran right. A path I'd followed stretched beyond the cabin, and I took off down it, sprinting blindly away from the logging site and its slasher movie rejects. By some miracle, I had the presence of mind to grab the satchel and supplies on my way out. I don't remember doing it, but in my blind panic, my survival instincts must have kicked in. I ran into my lungs like they were about to burst. I ran until my legs screamed in protest. And then somehow I kept running. The entire time I kept my eyes on the trail, dodging roots and fallen branches, because the last thing I needed was to trip and land face first in the dirt, an easy target for the glowing freaks hunting me. Eventually, when I couldn't push forward any longer, I collapsed into a massive oak tree beside the trail. Pressing myself into its shadow, I struggled to silence my ragged breaths. Sweat drooped on my face, and I wiped my sleeve, ears straining for any sign of pursuit. All I could hear were the whispers. The trees were still murmuring, and now, leaning in so close in understand them, the voices were my own. It was me and my co-hosts from Al Dente Rigor Mortis, dissecting a horror story like we always did. But something was off. I couldn't remember this discussion. The words sounded real, but they weren't memories I had. We never said the story's title, but I could tell it had something to do with Halloween. Then the recording, a knock came at someone's door. I could hear the confusion in my own voice as I checked it out, and was a loud crash, then screaming, panicked shouts, the sounds of a struggle, and then static. I sat there, listening to that static for what felt like an eternity, because I knew, deep down, that wasn't just a recording. That was it. I was done lingering near that tree. Hearing my own mismatched voices, discussing things I had no memory of, was unsettling enough. But the last part of that recording, the confusion, the crash, the screaming, it sent a deep, bone chilliness through me. I didn't want to sit there and let a panic attack take hold. I forced myself up, brushing off the leaves and dirt, and stepped back onto the path. That's my saw light. It flickered in the distance, just barely cutting through the endless twilight. I froze. That wasn't there before. Instinct took over, and I ducked in the fence, half hammering as I braced myself for the inevitable rev of a chainsaw. But it never came. The forest murmured on in its eerie, distorted way. Noiselessly, I peeked out from my hiding place. The light came from an old-fashioned lamppost, standing near a building. Another cabin, except this one definitely not been there before. Or had I simply been too panicked to notice? Either way, I didn't trust it, and I also didn't want to keep wandering aimlessly in a forest filled with glowing, axe-wielding lunatics. So, carefully I approached. My senses stayed on high alert, expecting something to lunge at me from the shadows. When nothing happened, I stepped up to the door, hesitated, then pushed it open. A brass bell above the door chimed. Danuja must in. Through the grainy windows, I had already noticed lights inside, but I wasn't prepared for what I walked into. The interior was unsettling blend of modern gas station and an old walled trading post. Fluorescent bulbs hummed softly overhead, casting everything in sterile light. The decor was rustic, almotique, the shelf stocked with goods, some familiar, some bizarrely out of place. And then my stomach growled. Hard. I hadn't realized just how hungry I was until I saw the snacks. Without thinking, I reached for the nearest bag of corn nuts. The moment my fingers touched the package, a light CD dimmed, a deep, rumbling voice filled the space. "You gonna buy that, son?" I nearly dropped the bag. My pulse spiked as my head snapped toward the counter. A shadow stood behind it, not just in shadow, a tall figure in a dark, impeccably tailored suit, its form blending seamlessly into the darkness beyond the counter. The only detail I caught was the deep green of its suit, barely distinguishable from the void. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. I wasn't even sure if I had my wallet. Thought it'd be 2 money units, the shadow intoned. I blinked. Money units. I patted my pockets, confirming what I'd somewhat's comes. Company script. Pods and Casters Company issued money units. Of course. My mouth felt dry. I don't have any. I guess you'll be a bit short on goods, too. The way it said that, so matter of fact, almost musical, sent a shiver through me and reminded me of a friend of mine from Kentucky, that same slow drawl with an unsettling undertone. I stood there awkwardly, trying to process what I was even talking to. I didn't want to push my luck, didn't want to make it meh. My eyes darted around, landing on a small table with stools by the window. Mind if I just sit for a bit? That's free for now. I nodded stiffly and moved toward the table, settling into the creaky wooden stool. Taking a deep breath, I pulled out the satchel, the one I grabbed in my desperate escape. Inside, I found the thermos, the candles, and of course, this notepad. So here I am, updating it again. After a few minutes, curiosity won out over fear. Any questions? So I stood, hesitated, then slowly approached the counter. Up close, and noticed something else. Intact radio equipment stack beside an old register. The lights above the counter remained dim, barely illuminating the figure standing in the void. I could just make out the outline of its sotas and Ford, ever so slightly. I swallowed. Where am I? The shadow shifted. Why, you're in Reverend's Goods, and partnership with Pods and Casters. Where is this? What's this forest called? For a long moment, the darkness seemed to study me. Then, in a slow, deliberate tone, I thought to call this place the Backlogs. A forest grown deep and expansive from the soils of what ifs and what could be. Broadcasts built on the ashes of old airwaves, nurtured by the waters of the Everstream. The company has prospered here for some time, logging and mining as it pleases. The Backlogs. I let the name settle in my mind, like something I'd known before but forgotten. I licked my lips, choosing my next words carefully. The sack heads, the ones with the letters V and B, and work for the company, sir. They handle the logging in these parts. Should I be worried about them? The shadow figure tilted slightly. They have of anger issues sometimes. A sharp chill crept down my spine. Yeah, no kidding. The sods are way off of this forest. The shadow figure let out a slow, deliberate hum before answering. Now, that's proprietary information, son. Gonna cost you 10 money units ought to do it, ice course. He knew I didn't have any money units. I couldn't see his face, but I knew he was smiling. As if to confirm it, he leaned back and let out a hearty chuckle. But might be someone who could help you out. That got my attention. Another one like you came through here not too long ago. Don't quite recall their face, funny thing that. But I do remember they called themselves Nair. Asked where they could get some money units. And well, I may have mentioned they should headed out to the O Company Mind. I frowned. The Wesser. It's a ways down the path, over the Everstream and up in the hills. You can't miss it. Rumors it fortune favors the bow over there. I turned toward the door, my stomach's twisting with dread. If I wanted out of this liminal, rustic dreamscape from hell. I was apparently headed for a mine grate. So, I'm not gonna have to actually work in the mine to get money, right? I asked wearily. The shadow was already retreating into darkness behind the counter, but I caught the tail end of a low, cackling laugh. It sounded like he had started fitted with the radio again. I sighed. Guess I'm going to a mine. And honestly, as weird, creepy, arsity and real as this all was, some part of me was excited. And that tiny voicey back of mine still clung to the idea that maybe, just maybe, this was all a hallucination, a coma dream, a dissociative episode. Because the only other option was that I had really screwed up, that dicking up that digital recorder in the woods. And if that was the case, I needed to survive long enough to figure out how to get back home. CT hums kiti nedritin to e2 tipultin tikan tudan titan tiketi in tree 3. Story time after the in Revan's goods, I started hiking along the path. This time, away from where I had previously run for my life. The loggers were nowhere to be seen. No distant chainsaw growls, no phantom footsteps. Just the ever-present murmur of the trees. Their recordings. Eventually, I reached a smaller trail that branched off toward a bridge. It spanned a winding river, the Everstream as the shadowy cloak had called it. I realized something then. Something that had been nagging at me for a while. In all my time walking, I hadn't seen a single Russens, Nabuls, nothing. Instead, embedded in the dirt and tangled in the tree roots, were old electronics, TVs, computer monitors, analog audio and video equipment. Like the discarded recorders I'd found earlier, these relics were just part of the landscape, as natural as pebbles would be anywhere else. When I reached the bridge, I hesitated, studying the river below. The Everstream flowed, but something about the water felt wrong. Its surface shimmered with a shifting, geometric pattern, like the light reflections you'd expect to see on water, except too perfect. Strangles were almost mechanical. Dying that eerie, digitized reflection, I saw them. More electronics, hard drives, rotors, tangled masses of wires and circuits was not normal. Not that I needed any more evidence. I shook my head, exhaling sharply. Wake up. Wake up. Nothing changed was real, or at least it felt real. I crossed forward, crossing the bridge and continuing along the path. The landscape on the side of the Everstream was steeper, the ground rising into uneven hills. My legs burned as the trail began to climb, and before long, I started seeing posted along the way. They were nailed to old wooden posts, half hidden by overgrown brush. Podies and Sasti SCO, and choir with affordable company town nightmare. But the next sign, Marin in crew with TCG 44 speak kins. I slowed my pace, squinting at the words. Ripping, I muttered under my breath, wiping sweat from my brow. If that meant what I thought it meant, I was in for some serious trouble. And somehow, I was only the halfway point. I was just about ready to fire back and follow the main path across the bridge when I heard a short, distant scream from somewhere up ahead. Parsony wanted to bolt right in there. I ducked down instinctively, my heart pounding, eyes darting frantically in search of the source. I crouched there for a good 5 minutes, surrounded by brush that I prayed wasn't poison ivy, waiting for something, anything, to come barreling toward me. When nothing happened, my curiosity got the better of me. I took deep breath, steadied my nerves, and decided to keep moving forward to see what that scream was about. The trail led me higher up the hill, where more old signs lined the path, similar to the ones I'd seen earlier. Eventually, the trail leveled out, revealing a small, sheer cliff face with an old, abandoned Maya entrance built into it. The place had all the hallmarks of a classic prospector setup. Rusted mining carts, ancient tools, and the unmistakable branding of Podcasters Co., emblazoned across various surfaces. A lone lantern hung near the mine's entrance, its soft glow casting ominous shadows. No one was around, feeling its warmth against my palm, and peered into the dark tunnel beyond. The shadows loomed, deep and uninviting, reminding me of my mild claustrophobia. If this tunnels and I have to crawl, nope. Not happening, I muttered under my breath. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. then stepped into the mine, the coda pressed in around me, the darkness swallowing me whole as I moved deeper inside. I'd been in caves and mines before. I'd owned recreation and like this. And all those horror stories and caving videos I'd seen online only made the experience worse. The tunnel was cramped, but at least it was still walkable. Only once did I have to crouch down and move forward onward like a character from Gears of War, and let me tell you, that sucked. I wasn't even sure what this mine was supposed to produce. Occasionally, I came across veins of a strange, iridescent mineral embedded in the rock. When I touched one, it gave off a faint hum that vibrated through my fingertips. The faint glow from these stones was the only light aside from my lantern. Here and there, I passed all unused lanterns and spent candles, their wicks buttoned and forgotten. Eventually, I saw a sign fixed to the tunnel wall ahead. Reformer's office, arrow pointed deeper into the mine. I slowed my pace, the hum from the iridescent stones mixing with unsettling, hollow sounds that echoed all around me. The deeper I went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, until I couldn't decide which was worse. This eerie mine or the whispering trees outside. Then my lantern's light caught something glistening on the ground. At first, I thought it was water. As I stepped closer, I realized it was blood. A chill ran down my spine as I saw the crumple of a person sprawled on the ground. They were facing me, head down, as if they'd been running back the way I had come. An old tiny miner's cap lay near, but their clothes were modern. Heart pounding, I crouched down, glancing nervously behind me before examining the body. They were dead. I didn't need to check for a pulse. The back was a mangled mess, a gaping hole as if something large had pierced it. Maybe even a pickaxe. I swallowed hard, resisting the urge to puke up this I'd eaten earlier. The smell of blood and gore finally hit me, sharp and nauseating, and I forced myself to look away. A soft, orange glow fitted from round the bempe head, accompanied by a faint clinking sound. Metal striking stone, slow and deliberate. I stood frozen in place, every muscle locked in nervous presses as I watched the source of the noise come into view. A tall, lanky figure emerged from the shadows. A dark shape moved with mechanical slowness, triancax behind it. Occasionally, the tool tapped against the ground or scraped along the wall, and Mituan's stone sound echoed down the tunnel. The dim light behind the figure cast it into an ominous silhouette, leaving its features obscured. But as my lantern's light bounced off the shape, I caught a glimpse of a name tag stitched in the figure's clothing. Foreman Knit. Then it looked up, and its eyes, browning red like a sleep paralysis demon, locked onto mine. I snapped out of my frozen state, pure terror coursing through my veins. I turned and ran, desperate to escape this nightmare of a mine. I felt a whoosh of air as the pickaxe barely missed where my head had been just seconds before. Foreman Knit might have awkward, lumbering gait, but he was fast when it came to swinging that weapon. I heard the citine metal crushing into stone just behind me, followed by the unmistakable's heavy boots, stumping onto the unfortunate soul I'd found earlier. I didn't look back. The next few minutes were a frantic blur, rush of darkness, flickering lantern light, and the deafening sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I slammed my head against the low spruce in my panic, barting back curses as pain flared through my scalp. I could only hope the tall bastard chasing me with more trouble squeezing through the tunnel, but I wasn't about to stop and find out. Finally, light. The entrance was just ahead, and despite the petal clay outside, I didn't slow down to let my eyes adjust. I barreled forward, desperate to escape. That was my mistake. I didn't see the end one waiting for me. Tall, lanky, a burlap sack over his head. He stood there silent, gripping a wooden axe. I only realized the danger when I heard it. Mechanical click, clack, click coming from beneath his mask. I tried to swerve, but I wasn't fast enough. Aim tore across my upper arm as the blade grazed me hot and sharp. My lantern slipped from my grasp as I stumbled past him, and a second later, I heard the unmistakable smash shattering against the ground. Then, sudden whoosh of fire. I had no time to process it. The momentum sent me tumbling down the slope, dirt and roost scraping against my skin as I had shit, rolling and skidding a quarter of the way down the hill. By the time I finally stopped, my head was spinning, my lungs burned, and my arm throbbed with a searing wet pain. The cut wasn't deep, but it bled. I clutched the wound tightly, trying to steady myself as I took stock of my surroundings. And I heard them, heavy ones, coming from above. I groaned, forcing myself back to my feet despite every part of me screaming in protest. My body ached, but I had no choice. I'd keep moving. This was probably the most I'd run in years. But when you're being chased by monsters with farm equipment, your body finds a way. I wished I still had the lantern. If it really caught fire, it might have given me a chance to put some distance between me and those two psychos. In desperation, I veered toward the only place I could think of, the general store. I wasn't even sure if it would still be there, but I had no better options. I risked a glance back as I sprinted toward the shop. No sign of them. Luck was on my side again. The store was still there, glowing like a sickly beacon in the darkness. The moment I reached the door, I threw open, sending the brass bell clanging wildly as I slammed it shut behind me. The suit-wearing shadow behind the counter barely reacted. "You trouble up of the mine, son?" I didn't answer. Instead, I staggered through the aisles, scanning the shelves for anything that could help me. My arm was still bleeding, and wasn't about to let it get worse. Luckily, I found what I needed fast, a first aid kit. I slapped it onto the counter and fished the money units from my pocket. Awkwardly softer than the shadow's unseen gaze on me. "That'll be 5 money units," he said, definitely grinning as he spoke. I didn't argue. I handed over the mixed ones and twos and hurried over to the eating table where I'd left my satchel. Thank God, it was still there. I sat down and started patching myself up, clumsily wrapping my arm with shaky hands. The cut wasn't deep, but it hurt. At least the bleeding slowed. I counted the remaining money units. 10 left. Originally, I'd hoped to use them for more food, maybe even a drink. I cursed that burlap, sack bastard with the axe under my breath. Nothing to be done about it now. If I could just get the information I needed. How to leave this place. I could eat at home. Hell, I'd buy myself a sausage farmer's wrap with a coffee. Dragging myself upright, I crossed the store and placed the rest of my money units on the counter. My voice was flat, exhausted, haragetivus, back to where I came from. The moment stretched on, agonizingly slow. A shadowed hand reached across the counter, creeping over the bills before plucking the way. For a few seconds, there was nothing but silence. Then, at last, the voice in the darkness spoke. "Well, now suppose you've earned it." I helmed back as it continued. "To go back to where you came from, you must leave the path by my humble shop and follow the Everstream. Walk away from the bridge and mine you visited." I exhaled. Telling me I just have to go back the way I came. Frustration crept into my voice, but the shadow remained calm, speaking in that same slow, casual drawl. "Follow the stream back to the old tracks, some of the oldest parts of the backlogs. From there, take the tracks left. They cross the stream at one point. So stay to the left of the water, follow them for a spell, and you'll find your way back to where you came from." The shadow leaned back, as though reclining in a chair. I asked, wary. He let out a low chuckle. "One you'll want to keep an eye out for echoes." That made me pause. "Echoes? Are they like the logging psychos?" Her shadow leaned forward again, his tone dropping to a whisper. "Keep away from him. You'll know them when you see them. And if he in revolves." A chill crawled up my spine at the way he said it. Low, deliberate, as if the very mention of them was enough to warrant caution. Then, as if the moment never happened, he turned away and began fiddling with the radio again, sorting the money units into the register like this was all just another transaction. "So there he has it. Follow the stream until I hit the old railway tracks. Follow the tracks left. If all went well, I'd end up somewhere back in the real world. Or, and be the tracks would pop up inside my house, and I could just call it a day. A really weird, painful day. I sat for a moment, staring at this notepad, debating something. Take it with me. If I made it back, I could post all of this online. Let people know about this place, warn them. But on the other hand, maybe it'd be better to leave it here, somewhere on the trail, in case someone else got lost like I did. Might save them some money units. I sighed and closed the notepad, running a hand over its worn cover. One last thought added the Ikus. No way to get more information about them. No way to prepare. Just a whispered warning that they're gone done in. Knock on wood. Until next time, maybe.